All right, so we're going to get started. Welcome to Evidence Unveiled, Examine the Impact of Understanding by Design Stage 2. Also, welcome to Office Hours. If this is something that you have not attended before, get excited, get ready. It's interactive, it's fast, it's furious. It's 30 minutes of really intense but really fun professional development. Also, grab your smart devices as we have QR codes that we'll do interactive activities with, because we like to learn with and from each other. And if you don't have your phone, you're distracting your child or you're doing whatever, it's charging, I will also throw links into the chat box for today so you can access it that way. All right, you ready? We're excited? Okay, so first thing we're going to do, scan the QR code using the camera on your smartphone, or I'm going to post a link in the chat box. And I am not the world's best person at talking and putting things in the chat box, so give me a second. All right, that should be your link. So this is going to take you to a tool called Padlet. And within Padlet, you're going to answer the question, when you hear the word assessment, what do you think of? So it could be definitions, it could be examples, anything you think of in terms of assessments. When you hear it, when you see it, what do you think of? So once again, you can click on this link in the chat box, or you can scan the QR code and it should take you to a Padlet link. And when you use Padlet, all you have to do is click submit, and you just type it in, click submit, and it should let you submit. Now, there's some cool things you can do if you've never used this before. They have color selection choices, or you can write a subject of your note, but you don't have to. Those are just some fun tools if you decide to use it in your classroom. If you decide that you like this and it's really cool, it's a great interactive collaborative tool. And you may want to check with your IT department to make sure it's actually available. So I don't see anyone typing in there yet. If you're having difficulties, let me know. The link should be in the chat box, or you should be able to use the QR code up on your screen. And the question we're going to answer is, when you hear the word assessment, what do you think of? All right, Diane says, I don't have a place to type my answer. Okie dokie, well, that's interesting. Thank you, Diane. Give me 2 seconds and see if I can fix that. Okay, how about now? Did we fix it? It wouldn't be a fun webinar if we didn't have a technology glitch. As teachers and educators, I'm sure you've all had that fun experience. I cannot type in the Padlet. Okay, that's a good idea. So Mandy's written her response in the chat box, and I will try to figure out what is going on with Padlet in the meantime. But if you want to just type your answer in the chat box, that's a great alternative. So what do you think of when you hear the word assessment? And if you just want to type it in the chat box, we'll go semi-old school and we'll type it that way. Opportunity to make improvements, that's fantastic. I love that idea. Evaluating students' learning, I love that. That is 100% tests. Jennifer said tests, yep. So we have, when I hear the word assessments, think of checking for understanding, opportunities for improvement, evaluating student learning, monitoring progress. I love that. Looks like Brittany's typing. Give her a chance to answer. All right, so we're kind of starting to see some similarities. Brittany said, checking for understanding and application of knowledge, fantastic. So we're seeing some similarities, right? We're checking for progression, we're evaluating students. So here's what we're going to start on. So now that we have some background information and we're kind of getting into understanding by design mindset, my name is Meredith Llewellyn. I'm the instructional design specialist here at Goodheart-Willcox Publisher. Just for some background information on me, I was a classroom teacher for a bunch of years, a technology and LMS trainer. I did PD presentations and instructional design. So in case you missed the beginning, this is fast-paced. It's a 30-minute webinar that we like to make as interactive as possible. And we're going to be taking some deep dives into understanding by design stage 2. All right, our goals for today, since this is understanding by design, we like to have our goals established. You will know the 6 facets of understanding. You'll be able to use components from stage 1 to create assessments. You'll know the importance of criteria and validity in terms of assessments, and you'll be able to analyze your teaching and develop a plan to help you incorporate it, hopefully tomorrow, or as quickly as you wanted to incorporate it. So before we get started, I have one more little activity I want us to do. Scan the QR code. This one should, in theory, work. And it's going to pull up a Mentimeter tool. And within Mentimeter, we're going to do a poll strategy called always, sometimes, or never. There will be 4 questions, and you'll just pick whichever one you think is the correct answer. So hopefully this one works slightly better. It's a great free tool. I'm going to talk a little bit longer while people click the link, and I'm going to give you a link in the chat box because I just reminded myself of that. So you can scan the QR code, or you can click this link and it'll take you to Mentimeter. And we are going to do always, sometimes, or never. There'll be 4 questions that you can answer. So first question, assessments should be fun and interesting. Always, sometimes, or never. So right now we have 6 for sometimes, 0 for never, 4 for always, another sometimes. So assessment should be fun and interesting. So we have 7 saying sometimes, 4 saying always, and no one saying never. So assessments can be fun, but that's not their actual intent. So our main intent or main goal with assessments, we're going to find out in a second because I don't want spoilers, is assessments and tests are the same things. Are they the same thing? They're always the same thing, sometimes the same thing, or never the same thing. So assessments and tests, are they the same thing? Always, sometimes, or never? So right now we have a lot of sometimes. That's the only answer we have. So correct. Sometimes assessments are tests, but sometimes they're not. So there's a very small category within the field of assessments that are actually tests. And we will go into the other options in a later date, well, later couple minutes from now. All right, so statement 3. Assessments are time consuming. Always, sometimes, or never. Assessments are time consuming. So we have a lot of sometimes. So assessments are time consuming. One person said always. We have no nevers. So assessments can be time consuming, especially the creation portion of them. Summative assessments can be a lot more time intensive. Performance assessments and events can be time intensive, but they don't always have to be time intensive. So our formative assessments tend to be pretty quick and hopefully are not that time intensive. So our last statement, assessments are for grading purposes only. We only use them for grading. Assessments are for grading purposes only. Sometimes, always, or never. Always, sometimes, or never. Assessments are for grading purposes only. So we have majority saying sometimes, a couple saying never, no one saying always. So assessments can be used for grading, but that's not actually their intent behind them. So our intent behind assessments is to just gather evidence. Now, it's nice when we have to give grades because it gives us that evidence piece, but we don't have to use them for that purpose. And they weren't actually created for that purpose. All right, so this was called Sometime, Always, Sometimes, and Never. It's a great strategy to use to activate your prior knowledge and get students thinking. You can do conversation topics. One of the things that I like to use it for, and when I taught science, I used it to identify misconceptions before we got into a subject. So it helped me figure out where we were misconception-wise. So stage 2 of understanding by design, you may be asking yourself, why did we just do strategies and talk about assessments? Well, your answer is stage 2 is because this is where we determine acceptable evidence. And usually this is accomplished by assessments. So in stage 2, or in stage 1, we use essential questions, enduring understandings, established goals, and learning outcomes to identify our desired results. Then we take all of those things and we combine them, and then we look for our evidence. How are we going to show those things? And lastly, from our assessments, we then can have our learning activities, which will help guide us towards our performance task and learning assessments along the way. So what are assessments? According to Martha Stanson et al., assessment is defined as the systematic collection and analysis of information to improve student learning. They monitor progress, which you guys said earlier. They give feedback to students, which I think somebody said earlier, and they provide evidence of understanding, which I'm pretty sure someone said earlier. So you guys are just rocking this. You already are doing amazing. So assessments are incredibly important because they monitor student progression towards the performance tasks. So performance tasks are kind of our end goal. They provide ongoing feedback for both the student and the instructor alike. And they're our main tool for providing our evidence to make sure understanding is actually occurring along the way, so we don't just give a test and have everybody fail. So our continuum of assessments to provide students with enough information and instructors with enough information to understand the subject, like say, I understand biology, I understand these concepts we're teaching. We use a continuum of assessments. So the end goal is the performance task, a complex challenge that mirrors what adults are actually facing in the real world. And to get to that end performance task with enough evidence that student learning has occurred and enough ample opportunities for feedback, revision, reteaching, it's important for instructors to provide a variety of assessments along this continuum, and they should vary in allotted time, in complexity. Some should be simple, some should be more difficult, some should be authentic, but that's not always the case when you're first learning. So sometimes they're not authentic. They should be directed or unstructured. And then throughout your unit, you should be doing informal checks that of an understanding, so formative assessments. And those should occur multiple times per day, per lesson, per unit. So an example of some of these would be observations, questions you ask, looking over student work, turn-in talks, round robins, etc. Now, our traditional quizzes and tests that I mentioned earlier, they actually do have a place. They're going to ensure and provide the evidence that students know the basic knowledge and skills leading up to that performance task. So they're not necessarily the end goal, like sometimes we use them as, but they can show us evidence along the way that that traditional learning, basic knowledge and skills has occurred. Now, authenticity is incredibly important to what we're talking about with assessments. Performance tasks are your end goal because they demonstrate really deep, true, meaningful understanding. When creating performance tasks, it's important that they're authentic. And what we mean by that is, how are adults in the field using or not using the skills and knowledge that you're teaching? How is what you're teaching actually used in the real world? So Wiggins and McTighe, who helped conduct the research for understanding by design, have identified the following criteria for authentic assessments. Your assessments are authentic if they're realistic and they replicate a real world situation. So when I taught biology, we used microscopes to do like a little mini forensic unit on who stole the mascot. They require judgment and innovation. The student should use the knowledge and skills gained during the lesson to tackle a challenge at the end. They ask students to actually do the subject. So do science, do music, do art, do woodwork, do whatever you're teaching. They should replicate key challenging situations similar to how adults do their projects. So they should assess the student's ability to use their repertoire of knowledge and skills to complete a task. Students should be able to demonstrate that they know which skills and knowledge to use and to what extent. So think of an athlete, they do drills all practice long. If they can use that effectively in a game, then they've understood what you're teaching them, and that's their performance task. Students should also have opportunities for practice and get feedback to refine their performance during the task. And then to help create authentic performance tasks, because sometimes those are really difficult to come up with, McTighe and Wiggins recommend using a simple acronym, which is GRASPS, which stands for goals, role, audience, situation, product, and standards. So if you're creating a performance task, you're like, I don't know how to do this, or I'm really stuck, you can ask yourself, okay, what is your goal or task? What are they going to be doing? What are they being asked to do? Okay. Who is your target audience? What is the situation you find yourself in? What are you creating? And how is your work going to be judged? So once you have these questions and they're all answered, you have the outline for your performance task, and all you have to do is format it to however you like your performance tasks to look. All right, now because I've jabbered at you for a little bit, I want to know, how do you use assessments and what do they look like in your practice? So how do you use them and what do they look like in your practice? Now, hopefully this Padlet works. If not, we'll figure it out because we're smart people and we can do this. What do they look like? What do assessments look like in your classroom or your practice? So in the chat box, I put a link, or you can scan the QR code, and hopefully this works. All right, so scan the QR code using your camera or your device on your phone, or click on the link in the chat box and answer, how do you use assessments in your practice, in your teaching, in your classroom? It looks like we're having issues again. Hopefully not. Link's not working. Okay. All right. Well, let's try the chat box again, and we'll just scrap Padlet for today. So in the chat box, how do you use assessments and what do they look like in your teaching practice? So how do you use assessments? So when I was a teacher, a lot of times my assessments, I taught life science. They would look anywhere from a unit on microscopes or frog dissections and using tools, to fist of 5, to here's a quiz to understand, like, do you know what the tools do? So in the chat box, answer, how do you use assessments and what do they look like in your practice? So while you guys are typing, because I know sometimes this can take a little bit of time, it's a pretty loaded question. This is a kind of modified 30-second expert strategy. So in the 30-second expert strategy, you are going to basically write what you know. If you were going to take this further, you could have students make a T-chart and you could have them share with each other and then with a larger group and then with the class. So in the chat box, share, how do you use assessments, or what do they look like in your classroom? This could be formative assessments. This could be a dissection task. Bob said generally they're objective or practical quizzes, test exams. Yep, this could be your benchmark exam. This could be a state test, a standards accreditation test. If you're a reading teacher, this could be the whole slew of reading tests you guys give. Mandy says, I used assessments to check for understanding, such as a quick 3, 2, 1. I've also used performance tasks associated with PBL, that stands for project-based learning units. That's fantastic. If you need your memory jogged, maybe you're an English teacher and you have essays. Mark says to evaluate mastery of standards. Great, perfect. So what do assessments look like in your class? This could be an example. This could be how do you use them? And if you're not a teacher, this could be in your practice. So people in central office or administrative positions, you guys still use your assessments. You just maybe use the data differently. I like to structure questions that uncover understanding and application. Perfect. Okay, so thinking like an assessor. When designing assessments to use in your practice, it's important to think like an assessor, not just an activity planner, which is the fun stuff. There are 3 questions that you can ask to guide your development. What evidence can show the students have achieved your desired results? What assessment tasks and other evidence will anchor your curricular units? And what should we look for to determine the extent of student understanding? So by asking these questions, you're going to help us determine the most acceptable evidence for your assessments. And along with that, you have what we call the 6 facets of understanding. A basic requirement of assessing for understanding is that we know how the learners are thinking. How are they getting to where they're going? The 6 facets of understanding can tell us what type of performance tasks would be valid based on the type of evidence we need. So the 6 facets can help us clarify the desired understandings, the necessary assessment tasks, and the learning activities that will most likely advance student understanding. Using these 6 facets of understanding gives us categories that make it easier to recognize if students are actually understanding. So here's our categories. Explain, so an explanation, explain the big ideas in their own words. This could be a graphic organizer to show connections. 2, interpretation. This requires students to make sense of the information, to analyze and interpret their data. 3, application. They can use their knowledge and skills in new situations, and they can develop. So an example would be if you're a health teacher, help develop a menu for healthy snacks and meals for a family of 5 for 1 week and stay in budget. Perspective, students can see things from a different point of view. So maybe if you're doing something that involves geometry, compare the shortest distance between 2 points in 3 different spaces. Empathy, the ability to appreciate people who think and act differently from us. So in science, this could be when you read and discuss discredited and ancient theories to understand how we got to where we currently are. And self-knowledge. They self-assess and reflect on their past and present work. So they could ask, or you could ask them even before you grade it, you assess how well you did. Here's a rubric, you grade it. And then I'll compare my grade to your grade. And these are kind of triggering Bloom vibes, right? Or DOK vibes. They're easily combined with those. So if your district uses those, these fall right in line and they're easily combinable. So criteria, validity, and rubrics. This is our last hurrah in assessments, but they're really important. When designing assessments, we must also be aware of validity, criteria, and rubrics. According to Cambridge, validity refers to whether an assessment measures what it aims to measure. Did you actually set out to measure and actually measure what you meant to? So if I meant to measure, did the students know how to use a microscope? Did my lesson actually get that? Did my assessment get that? Or was I way off base? According to Newcastle University, assessment criteria are specific standards or guidelines that outline what is expected of a student in a particular assessment task. So performance tasks require open-ended prompts and questions that don't have single or clear answers. This means that you have to be really clear on your criteria for the students as to what is needed to determine if understanding actually occurred and to what degree. It also, as a teacher, makes you grade more consistently and fairly. So these criteria should specify how successful the performance task looks, and it should come from your goals, okay? So for example, if I take a 6th grade standard from Pennsylvania that says students will write persuasive pieces with a clearly stated position or opinion and supporting detail while citing sources when needed, they listed all of my criteria in there. Students should clearly state their position. They should support it with details and cite their evidence when needed. That's my criteria. Now, to help me grade that criteria, I would use a rubric. So rubrics are scoring guides based on those criteria that have fixed scales and points, and they have descriptions for each of the characteristics for each point. They show degrees of understanding on a continuum, so there's no longer just right, wrong. There's like, yeah, you were mostly right, or you were pretty wrong, or you were right in the middle. But students and teachers can also see where the disconnect is, or if true understanding has actually occurred. So we're coming to an end, and I want to assess so what, or do a strategy called what, so what, now what. So you're going to tell me, what did you learn today? Okay. Why is that important? Why does it matter? What's your so what? And how are you going to apply it? So now what? To access this, scan the QR code, and this will take us to a Mentimeter, which worked last time, so fingers crossed. And click anywhere on the page to answer. There should be a box, and you should be able to type into it, and then click submit. And you're going to answer what, so what, now what? And this strategy is going to help you reflect. So when you use this strategy, your students get a chance to meaningfully reflect on what they just learned, and they also get the time to create connections to their personal lives, their personal experiences, and the material. So what, now what? Lots of whats. Assessments come in different shapes and sizes with different purposes. I love that. Clarification of assessment types and the 6 facets impact teaching and learning helps see where my students are in the learning process and add different types of assessments to my course. Fantastic. That's really great. So excited for you. All right. Well, I want to be cognizant of your time as more. Oh, pop up. Perfect. All right. I learned about grasps. This will help when I'm stumped on writing questions. I'm so glad I threw that in there, hoping it would help people. Can help provide new variety of question and styles to engage students. Perfect. Good stuff offered today. Will augment nicely with what I already do. I'm so glad, Bob. Yay. All right. So I'm gonna let you can keep popping up in there, and we'll reflect back to it in a second, but I want to be cognizant and aware of your time. So recapping, we talked about the 6 facets of understanding and grasps. We learned how to use stage 1 components to create assessments. We learned the importance of criteria and validity in assessments, and we, at the very end, gave you hopefully something that you can take back tomorrow and use in your practice ASAP. Now, technology-wise, Padlet didn't work, but I promise it actually is a really cool tool. And Mentimeter. And then strategies, we did a bell ringer. We did always, sometimes the never. We tried a modified 30-second expert for time constraints. And we did what, so what, now what.